What's up, everybody? It's FYGP, and today I've got a very good article by geopoliticaleconomy.com written by Ben Norton. I often listen to his show, it's a great show. And this is really eye opening information right here. So, the title Al Qaeda linked rebels in Syria say they love Israel. USA gave them billions in weapons and support. The US spent billions over years arming and training militants in Syria, many linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS. The extremist rebels who took over the country told the Israeli media they love Israel. Interesting, right? You would think that those guys wouldn't be quite fond of Israel. Let's continue reading. The United States spent billions over years arming and training militants in Syria, many linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Current U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan admitted back in 2012 that AQ is on our side in Syria. Right, that was in a message to Hillary Clinton, and that was released by WikiLeaks. But also we have this document from the Defense Intelligence Agency from 2012. That essentially says that an Islamic State is desired in eastern Syria to affect the West's policies in the region. So, the quote that stands out the most here, I think I went through this document many times, but is essentially this one. If the situation unravels, there is the possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria, Hasaka and Dar ez-Zor, two provinces where ISIS did take over, and this is exactly what the supporting powers of the opposition want in order to isolate the Syrian regime, which is considered the strategic depth of the Shia expansion, Iraq and Iran. So you can see it's all against Iran, geared against Iran, of course. And Assad, being a former ally of Iran, of course, had to go over it as well. Of course, the pipelines, which I mentioned before, they also play a big deal. And, of course, throwing the Russian bases out of Syria, which would also be a desired effect of this. And just billions for Lockheed Martin and Raytheon would also be a nice side effect of a continual, perpetual war in Syria. Of a perpetual dirty war, I should say. That is the appropriate term that should be used when describing this conflict. Because it's not a civil war, because as admitted in these documents, basically is that these elements were brought in from the outside and were funded from the outside. So this is the main takeaways from the document. Al-Qaeda drives the opposition. In Syria, they knew that in 2012. The West identifies with the opposition. The establishment of a nascent Islamic State became a reality only with the rise of the Syrian insurgency. There is no mention of U.S. troop withdrawal from Iraq as a catalyst for Islamic State's rise, which is the contention of innumerable politicians and pundits. So they always claim that the power vacuum left when the United States retreated from Iraq was the reason for the rise of the Islamic State. But it's clear by their own DIA documents, Defense Intelligence Agency documents, that it's not that way. It's actually the Syrian insurgency that is the main reason for an Islamic State. The establishment of a Salafist principality in eastern Syria is exactly what the external powers supporting the opposition want, identified as the West, Gulf countries, and Turkey, in order to weaken the Assad government. Safe havens are suggested in areas conquered by Islamic insurgents along the lines of the Libyan model, which translates to so-called no-fly zones as first act of humanitarian war. Iraq is identified with Shia expansion. So Iran being blamed for the Shia expansion and into Iraq, basically. A Sunni Islamic State could be devastating to unifying Iraq and could lead to the renewing facilitation of terrorist elements from all over the Arab world entering into the Iraqi arena. There is also a document related to that. But you get the point. They knew all of this way back in 2012, yet they decided to continuously fund and arm these so-called rebel groups, which are really Al-Qaeda and ISIS. That is the point. In December 2024, armed extremists overthrew the Syrian government and seized power in the capital Damascus in an operation sponsored by NATO member Turkey. The assault was led by rebranded Al-Qaeda militia that espouses a fanatical Salafi jihadist ideology. Some of the Al-Qaeda-linked rebels who now rule Syria told the Israeli media that they love Israel. They vowed to publish a new pro-Western regime in the country, Israel has for years given weapons and other forms of support to extremist rebels in Syria, including Al-Qaeda. They successfully toppled the government of President Bashar al-Assad, who had refused to recognize Israel and had provided military aid to resistance groups in the region. Rebranded Al-Qaeda takes over Syria. The Salafi jihadist militants who seized Syria's second biggest city, Aleppo, in late November and subsequently took over Damascus on December 8th were portrayed sympathetically in Western media as rebels. But they were led by rebranded Al-Qaeda. I think we know that, and I covered this, so I think we can skip this. Neoconservative think tanks in Washington have whitewashed HTS leaders as diversity-friendly jihadists, but they still maintain the same fascist ideology. So this is an actual article by Aaron Y. Zane, who says how Syria's diversity-friendly jihadists plan to build a state. Didn't read this yet, so maybe this is for another video. But as you can see, they are being branded as diversity-friendly. In fact, despite this cynical rebranding effort, the US government officially recognized HTS as a terrorist organization in 2018, adding the extremist group to its previous designation of Jabhat al-Nusra. So they have funding Israel, Turkey, Gulf monarchies have been funding them. Oh, okay, so here we go to the WikiLeaks email. That is also something I wanted to cover. Jake Sullivan, AQ, is on our side in Syria. When Barack Obama was president, Sullivan was the top aide for Secretary of State Hillary. I like to call her Hillary. In 2012, he used the State Department email to send Clinton a message, which was later made public on WikiLeaks, and it says basically, see last item, AQ is on our side on Syria. This is from February 12, 2012. So they knew this. Can't believe that 12 years have more. Like 12 years have passed. Still remember the years of Hillary as Secretary of State. It was horrible. So we all know all this. The CIA launched a covert program to arm and train rebel groups attempting to overthrow the Syrian government. The Washington Post reported in 2015 that this initiative had a budget approaching $1 billion a year, meaning that Syria's related operations account for about $1 for every $15 in the CIA's overall budget. So a very big budget, certainly $15 billion being the total budget, but $1 billion being spent on overthrowing Assad. Of course, there's also a huge black budget and a huge accounting hole. But of course, I mean, lots of money anyways gets siphoned off to fund certain shady rebels, Islamists really, Al-Qaeda in Syria. The CIA program called Timber Sycamore, Operation Timber Sycamore, was, in the words of the New York Times, one of the most expensive efforts to arm and train rebels since the agency's program arming the Mujahideen in Afghanistan during the 1980s, which was known as Operation Cyclone. Wow. Just all of this money. I mean, what was the annual military spending of Syria? We can go look that up. So yeah, according to some websites right here, Stockholm International Relations Institute and tradingeconomics.com. It should be around 2.35 billion annually. So this is the total budget of the Syrian military, right? And they were spending just, which amounts to 4% of the GDP in 2010. So before the so-called civil war, which is really an CIA-led insurgency, started. So, yeah, you can see that. You can see that it's a lot of money. It's like just for the covert operation, what this CIA was spending. Never mind all of the other countries, all of the other intelligence services. It was 1 billion. Now, this, I think, in total, the funds that were used to fund the rebels, basically, in Syria would, would be much more than 2.35 billion, which would be the annual spending of the Syrian military. The Pentagon publicly admitted in 2015 that rebels armed and trained by the United States and its allies gave their weapons to Syria's Al-Qaeda affiliate Jabhat al-Nusra. Yeah, no. Shit happens, right? Amnesty International also found that the genocidal fascists in ISIS, also known as ISIL or Islamic State, were using U.S. weapons. The mainstream British organization Conflict Armament Research, which is funded by European governments, similarly concluded that many of the weapons of the US and allies, such as Saudi Arabia, provided to rebels in Syria ended up going to ISIS. Yeah, this is the document I pulled up before, so this is something I did cover. Israel supports them. Here we have an article from 24th of April 2017. Ex-defense minister says IS apologized to Israel for November clash. Prominent Israeli think tank that does contract work for NATO published a paper in 2016 arguing that the West should not destroy ISIS because it was a useful tool against Iran, Hezbollah, and the Syrian government. You would think that Israel would be one of the top lists of priorities for Israel would be to destroy, the ISIS baby people. Apparently not. Yadlin happily noted, characterized, so this is a report from the Jerusalem Post. Believe Israel treating Al-Qaeda fighters wounded in Syria civil war. So some of the fighters of Al-Qaeda who were fighting against Assad were actually treated for wounds on the Golan Heights on Israeli occupied territory. So characterizing Al-Qaeda as the last leader, the Wall Street Journal quoted Israel's former military intelligence chief, Amos Yadlin, who said that Shia Islamic nationalist political forces like Lebanon's Hezbollah and Iran are the major threats to Israel, much more than the radical Sunni Islamists. This is what I've been saying also. Yadlin happily noted that Al-Qaeda hasn't bothered Israel. Those Sunni elements who control some 2/3 of the 90% of the border of the Golan Heights aren't even attacking Israel, remarked the former intelligence chief. This gives you basis to think that they understand who is their real enemy. Maybe it isn't Israel. While they were committing genocide against Shia Muslims and other religious minorities, ISIS extremists publicly showed sympathy with Israel. In 2017, Israel's former defense minister Moshe Yaalon revealed that ISIS had apologized to Israel after accidentally attacking Israeli forces in the Golan Heights, which is sovereign Syrian territory that has been illegally occupied by Israel for decades, according to international law. So it's occupied against international law. Syrian rebels say they love Israel. After rebranded Al-Qaeda took over Aleppo, several Syrian opposition activists spoke with Israeli media. As Israel used U.S. weapons to carry out a blatant genocide in Gaza, these Syrian rebel leaders had heaped praise on the regime of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who faces an International Criminal Court arrest warrant over crimes against humanity committed against the Palestinian people. Also, he is embroiled in corruption charges, which are much more devastating to him personally, because nobody's actually going to arrest him, of course. But he might face, losing power in Israel if the corruption charges are proven true. So Netanyahu is always doing things to distract from that. Israel's state media outlet Kan interviewed rebels from Aleppo and Idlib who said, "We love Israel and we were never enemies." If you don't believe it, here's the article from the Times of Israel. Syrian rebels appear to credit Israeli strikes on Hezbollah with aiding shock advance. So, Israel was bombing targets of Hezbollah and Iran in the days leading up to the rebel offensive, as they like to call it, on the Western media, which essentially helped them seize so much territory. I'm sure it helped. So, is that a commercial? Is it a commercial to help female IDF soldiers? So yeah, they are let's go back to the article. They are gonna summarize it as well in Ben Norton article. So according to the terms of Israel isn't hostile to those who aren't hostile toward it. We don't hate you, we love you very much. So that's a quote from a rebel that they interviewed. According to the Times of Israel, the Syrian militants praised Israel for bombing Hezbollah. They credited Israel's war in Lebanon for helping them conquer Aleppo. A Syrian rebel commander told Israel's Channel 12 that the militants sought to overthrow President Bashar al-Assad and create a new government that has good relations with all countries in the region, including Israel. The rebel commander asked Israel to directly attack Syria, stating, "We call on the Israeli leadership to launch intensive attacks against the positions and troops of the Iran-backed militias in Syrian territory." Israel has already bombed Syria hundreds of times in the past decade, targeting anti-colonialist fighters from the Axis of Resistance. The United States has also bombed Syria dozens of times since 2011, including most recently in November 2024. And I'm sure they're bombing right now as well. So US tries to divide and conquer the Axis of Resistance. So the Axis of Resistance is Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and Palestine, including groups like Hezbollah and the Houthis and Hamas. So basically the brand the branding for this faction you have right here. So Syria has been an important part of this network, providing weapons to resistance groups that are fighting against U.S. and Israeli military occupiers. So essentially, Syria was vital because they had all of these stockpiles of weapons that, from the old Soviet arsenals that the Soviets already had sold them. And those weapons would continuously make their way into the hands of Houthis, Hamas, or Hezbollah. And of course, Israel did not like that. Reuters reported on December that the U.S. government and its allies in the United Arab Emirates are pursuing Syria to cut its close ties to Iran and to end weapon shipments to national liberation groups like Hezbollah. So, of course, this article is also a bit tilted towards, Iran and Lebanon and Hezbollah. So, for some people they are liberation groups, for other people they are terror groups. I'm not particularly fond of either, Shia or Sunni extremism, even though, the violence inflicted by Sunni extremists is much bigger, of course, and Iran does seem to be a reasonable nation that can be negotiated with, as opposed to these lunatic Sunni extremists running around in Syria, funded by the CIA and Mossad. In return for fragmenting the resistance axis, Washington offered to lift the suffocating sanctions it has imposed on Syria. So that is something that is going to help al-Julani massively. If the United States lifts the Caesar sanctions, as they are called, that would perhaps give some breathing space to the Syrian population, and they would have perhaps some consistent electricity, water, and food supplies running again. I mean, during the Assad government, before the war, everything was, the university and healthcare was free, electricity was very cheap, and everything, a lot of things were provided by the government. It was basically a similar system as established by Gaddafi in Libya, even though Gaddafi went even further and made housing free for many Libyans, and even I don't think he did not charge any bills for electricity. So before the war, people in Syria lived quite normal lives, I would say, and they had universal health care, something the United States, of course, does not have. So they had universities, they had doctors, they had scientists, something that modern-day Syria does not have anymore, and something that has been destroyed and ruined by the United States, Israel, and its allies, of course. The United States and European Union had for many years maintained crushing unilateral sanctions on Syria in flagrant violation of international law. The UN's top expert, special reporter Alena Duhan, said these Western sanctions on Syria were outrageous and are suffocating millions of civilians. She wrote that they may amount to crimes against humanity. Western sanctions had devastated Syria's economy, crushing high levels of inflation and shortages of food and fuel. So just as I said before, the inflation was extremely high. These shortages had been exacerbated by the U.S. military illegal occupation of Syrian sovereign territory in the east of the country, where its oil reserves are located. So I covered this way back when it was happening. U.S. troops are occupying Syria's oil fields. Congress refuses to withdraw them. That is absolutely true. So here's an editor's note. So he published it on December 6th and updated it on December 9th because they had moved on and conquered Damascus and overthrown the Syrian government on December 8th. So, good article by Ben Norton. Let's go to the next article that I wanted to cover. From terrorist to freedom fighter, how the West rebranded Al-Qaeda's Jolani, Syria's new leader. Basically, this is some information that we did go through. Of course, it mentions the previous article. And there's also a portrait from Rolling Stone that describes him as a ruthless, pragmatic, astute politician who has renounced global jihad and intends to unite Syria. Sure. The Washington Post also described him as a pragmatic and charismatic leader, while CNN portrayed him as a blazer-wearing revolutionary. And from the Britain Daily Telegraph, how Syria's diversely friendly jihadists plan on building a state. That is from the Telegraph. Wow. Really, really sick propaganda right here. Meanwhile, people are being killed on the streets, And CNN, even, they scored an interview, a sit-down interview with Jolani. I mean, it's incredible. There's a $10 million bounty on his head, but somehow he, CNN finds him. And I guess CNN didn't report him. I mean, they know exactly where he is. They know exactly where he is. They could take him out tomorrow. Yeah. This is what he said about his teenage mistakes. Ridiculous. In 2013, they labeled him as one of the world's top 10 most dangerous terrorists, known for abducting, torturing, and slaughtering radical and religious minorities. I'm sure he's guilty of all of the above, but now he's different. He is a changed man. I also should mention that he is born in Syria, but he grew up in Saudi Arabia, which is the hotbed of Sunni Salafi extremism. His parents are Syrian, though. We talked about his ties. Syria is being purified, he told the crowd in Damascus on Sunday. This victory is born from the people who have languished in prison, and the fighters broke their chains, he added. So his real name is Ahmad Hussein al-Shar. So as I said, al-Jolani is just a alias. He was born in Saudi Arabia, excuse me. He was born in but his parents were Syrian, who fled the Golan Heights area in Syria after 1976 Israeli invasion. Interesting. In 2003, he went to Iraq to fight against American forces. After 3 years of war, he was captured by the U.S. military and spent over 5 years in prison, including a stint in the notorious Abu Ghraib torture center. So he was also located there. Didn't know that. While in Iraq, Jolani fought with ISIS and was even a deputy to its founder. Immediately upon release in 2011, ISIS sent him into Syria with a rumored $1 billion to fund the Syrian wing of Al-Qaeda and participate in the armed protest movement against Assad that arose out of the Arab Spring. See the reference for that. It's from PBS Frontline. Interesting. So, the jihadist. That is apparently from that movie. Interesting how just 3 years ago, there used to be a completely different narrative. I mean, we knew all of this. It's ridiculous. We'll continue with this article right when we. Realizing the extremely poor reputation Al Qaeda had in the region and across the world, Julani attempted to rebrand his forces, officially shuttering the Al Nusra Front in January 2017 and on the same day founding HTS. He claimed that HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, preaches a very different ideology and that it will represent Syrian diversity. Not everyone is convinced of this, least of all the British government, who immediately prescribed HTS, describing it as merely an alias of Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda ISIS, man, didn't reinvent themselves. He had the whole propaganda. Al Qaeda ISIS man didn't reinvent himself. He had the whole propaganda and intelligence apparatus of the West, including the BBC, doing it for him, remarked the co-founder of Electronic Intifada, so a pro-Palestinian group, Ali Abu Nima. How the US and Israel quietly revived Al-Qaeda allies in Syria's Idlib offensive. The recent fall of Aleppo to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham highlighted the troubling truth. Washington and Tel Aviv's shadowy support for extremist group continues. Al-Qaeda Syria connections, Bashir Assad sanctions relief, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham rebranding, HTS Aleppo offensive, Iran-Syria alliance, Israel Hezbollah strategy, blah blah blah. So this is the keywords. So I guess I don't know. So Timber Sycamore program US. So yeah, this is what is happening, and of course, who is surprised? And of course, they're not doing it because they are ideologically aligned to Islamists or something like that. Of course, the Zionists, they don't like them, and neither, apparently some members of HTS do like Israel, as we highlighted before, but I don't think that a lot of Salafists are particularly fond of Israel either. So, yeah, this is just Israel, United States, and their intelligence services utilizing the worst elements of society, as they always do, as they also do in Ukraine, utilizing the neo-Nazis in Ukraine, so to overthrow the government. This is what is happening. They're utilizing the worst elements of society, of Syrian society. The new government likes Israel, hates Hezbollah. The name al-Julani translates from the Golan Heights, and yet the leader appears distinctly unconcerned with the Israeli invasion of his homeland. Did he issue a statement to Israel that he will reconquer the Golan Heights, that he will reclaim legitimate Syrian territory, his homeland, where his parents were driven out from during the 1967 invasion of the Golan Heights by Israel? No. He apparently hasn't even said a word about Israeli troops moving as close as 20 kilometers to Damascus. Very suspicious stuff right there. And of course, the Israelis, they destroyed 80% of the assets of the Syrian military, allegedly, which of course indicates that they of course don't want al-Julani to have any heavy equipment, any navy or anything else, which of course makes sense because for Israel he is just a tool, it's just a temporary alliance, and they're just controlling and infiltrating these groups for their own purposes. So yeah, this is how it is possible that these two radically opposed factions, at least ideologically speaking, are essentially working together. So, I hope I did explain that well. Of course, they destroyed all the weapons, so Julani wouldn't have them. I also did mention that. But no word from the new Syrian government about Israel annexing, perhaps the Golan Heights and moving as close as 20 kilometers towards Damascus. No, just praise. Okay. Here we go. The IDF has taken much of southern Syria, including the strategic Mount Hermon, which is actually the tallest mountain in Syria, overlooking Damascus. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has stated that this is part of a permanent operation. The Golan Heights will forever be an inseparable part of the State of Israel, he proclaimed. Chilani has already said that he has no intention of confronting Israel. Syria is not ready for war and does not intend to go into another war. The source of concern was the Iranian militias and Hezbollah, and the danger has passed. He said a strange thing to say why Israel is carrying out the largest Air Force operation in history, pounding, well, at least its largest, I guess, pounding military targets all over Syria. The HTS spokespersons have also categorically refused to comment on Israel's attacks on the country, even when pressed by incredulous Western journalists. Excuse me, it's 4 a.m. right here, I'm butchering words, I can't read anymore. So, Giuliani's comments signaling out of two Shia forces rather than Israel, signaling out two Shia forces rather than Israel as enemies of the state, will have many concerned that this could signal a return to process of Shia slaughter ISIS waged over much of Syria and Iraq in 2016, over much of Syria and Iraq. This is weirdly structured. In 2016, the U.S. House of Representatives voted 383-0 to classify this process as a genocide. So if Giuliani goes and commits genocide against Shia, Christians, Druze, the Druze people, excuse me, it's always hard to pronounce. Yeah, that would go against this, right? Fortunately, the new government will likely be a coalition of desperate and moderating forces. However, these groups seem to share a common threat. They all appear to be pro-Israel. A commander of the secular Free Syrian Army, for example, recently gave an interview to the Times of Israel. So also there it is a question, how much are they pro-Israel and how much are they anti-Iran, if you know what I'm saying. Do they hate Iran more than they love Israel? That is the question. Where he looked forward to the new era of friendship and harmony with its neighbor to the south. We will go for full peace with Israel. Since the outbreak of the Syrian civil war, we have never made any critical comments against Israel, unlike Hezbollah, who has stated that they aim to liberate Jerusalem and the Golan Heights, he said. So they don't even want to liberate parts of their own country, let alone, reclaim Jerusalem, the third holiest city in Islam. So that is quite sus. I have to say. That is so sus. And, somebody's an imposter right here. He's a sussy imposter. The commander added that Israel will plant a rose in the Syrian garden and asked for the country's financial support in forming a new government. Oh, okay, so he's like Zelensky asking for money. Nice. Other Assad forces have gone even further with anti-Assad forces, with one individual stating that Israel isn't hostile to those who aren't hostile towards it. We don't hate you, we love you very much. We are quite happy when you attack Hezbollah, really happy. We're glad that you won. Statements like this might surprise a casual observer, but the reality is that Israel has been funding, training, and arming much of the Syrian opposition since its inception, of course, Al Qaeda as well. Oh, they were, treated in Israel and treated for their wounds on the occupied Golan Heights, as I mentioned before. And while radical Islamist forces appeared to be enemies with everyone, the one group they facetiously avoided any confrontation with was Israel. Yeah, there was no attack on Israel ever. He even apologized for firing on them, as I mentioned before. From the Golan Heights, the year-long Israel campaign against Hezbollah and Syrian army positions also seriously weakened both forces, aiding the opposition in their victory. Al-Qaeda and the US, a complicated relationship. So, this is the whole history. This is how, brilliant minds such as Zbigniew Brzezinski, all those guys in the think tanks in Washington, came up with the idea to arm the Mujahideen, Osama bin Laden, in Afghanistan to push out the Soviets. I have told this story a million times. I've told a story about the Big 9 event a million times and what my opinions about it are. I don't need to go through all of this. But this is interesting. Who gets to define terrorists? Of course, many have argued that the US terror list is entirely arbitrary to begin with, and is merely a barometer of who is in Washington's good books at any given time. In 2020, the Trump administration removed Sudan from the state sponsors of the terror list in exchange for the country normalizing relations with Israel, proving how transactional the list was. A few months later, it removed East Turkestan Islamic Movement, an Uyghur militia currently active in the Syrian civil war. Yes, they are funded by Turkey. From its list because its hardening attitude towards China. Right, that's the Uyghurs that won liberation in East Turkestan. Right. So they also removed them just to spite China. Washington also continues to keep Cuba on its terror list despite there being no evidence of the island ever supporting terror groups. Yes, that is absolutely true. Cuba did not blow up anything. Did not support people that blow up stuff. I mean, they supported various rebels and insurgencies and guerrilla groups, but terror groups, not really. And the US refused to remove Nelson Mandela from its list of the world's most notorious terrorists until 2008, 14 years after he became president of South Africa. In comparison, Jelani's redesignation might take fewer than 14 days. Yep. A giant rebranding operation is taking place. Both corporate media and the US government have attempted to transform the founder and the head of Al Qaeda affiliate organizations into a woke, progressive actor. It remains to be seen how exactly Jelani will govern and whether he can maintain support from a wide range of Syrian groups. Given what we have seen in the past, however, he can be confident of enjoying a strong support from his Western press. Now, just to add here briefly, do I think that the West intended that all of Syria gets taken over by these guys? Perhaps not. I certainly do think that everyone was surprised by the speed of the HTS advance. But since he has already taken over Syria, they're doing the best out of it and they have to organize this rebranding. If it was perhaps still Assad staying in Damascus and just HTS taking over Aleppo, perhaps, they would, not start with this rebranding yet. But I think it's quite urgent for them because I don't think they themselves intended for this to go this well. So yeah, that's it for me. See you guys another time. It's FYGP tuning out.